So we need a couple of bathroom cabinets. I've never made bathroom cabinets, but my supplier did have a pretty good deal going on white oak. So I figured, what the heck, let's give it a shot. So let's see what I came up with. What do you think? Yeah, that's what I thought too. Like any woodworker, when presented with a deal at your supplier, I bought more than I needed for this project. Oh well, I guess that means more projects. That also meant starting off and picking out the proper boards and getting a good grain match and going through the milling process. Started with the miter saw to get them down to a rough length, which also took out any bends, twists, and warps that I had in these boards. Then I was able to take them over to my planer and clear out any high spots and get them down to the final 3/4 of an inch thickness that I was looking for to start with. After the thicknessing, I was able to then take them over to the table saw and go through some joining steps. At this point, you might be asking, why am I using hardwood instead of plywood like everybody else seems to do? The answer to that is quite simple. I prefer the look of hardwoods, and starting with hardwood from the get-go, for me right now, is easier than building a plywood cabinet and putting veneers on. So this is what I went with. And we like the look of the white oak in our bathroom. Since this is going to be in our master bath, we were going to be seeing it all the time. That's what we decided to go with. Now I'm able to bring it over to my table saw and use the sled that I created to act as my jointer, since I don't actually have a jointer. This sled uses the match fit system with their dovetail clamps, and this gives me a good, clean, 90-degree edge that I can use to go through the rest of the milling process after this, which is going to be cutting everything down to width on my table saw. So this edge then acts as a jointed edge that I can put up against my fence and gives me that good, clean start. And at this point, you can see I've gone through everything. All the pieces I've selected have been cut to length, planed down to thickness, and jointed on one edge. And now I'm able to come through and cut them to the width that I want. The dimensions I started with were about 25 by 7 by 3/4 of an inch. This was going to allow me to get everything I needed to make the cabinets that we had decided to go for about 24 by 10 by 6.5, roughly. And then this is the results of the milling process. You can see there's some really good figure and some really pretty grain in this, and the white oak came out to be a really good choice for these. At this point, I start working towards final dimensions, including putting 45-degree angles on each end of these boards for the sides, so that I can use them to create my 90-degree miter joints around the box. Don't do what I'm doing here. Use a miter gauge to make these kinds of cuts, or some sort of a cross-cut sled or something. Don't do this. What I'm doing here, it makes it difficult to keep it at a 90 to the blade and up against the fence and all these kinds of things. For some reason, I don't know why, I just never thought to grab one of my miter gauges and use that to do this with. I did this, and I don't know. I'm just telling you, don't do this. It's not the best way. It's not the easiest way. It's not the safest way. Grab a miter gauge. And if you can, get one that's not the one that came with your table saw. Even the ones that come with these expensive saw stop saws aren't any good. They need some modification to make them really good. So get one that's in your budget and do that. It's much safer. But this did allow me to go through and get the 45s on each end that I needed for the sides, as well as cut then the top and bottom pieces. And then what I've done here is, now that I've got the 45 on one end of this one, this is going to wind up being the one that I cut to make the top and the bottom. So I know I wanted them to be roughly 10 inches. And what you'll see me do here is first measure and mark the wrong edge, and then realize my mistake, and then I'll come back and measure and mark the other edge where I'm actually going to be cutting, because there's absolutely nothing quite like measure twice, forget your measurements, measure again, realize you did it wrong, measure another time, still cut it wrong, go right on the board and start over. But hey, that's woodworking. So one thing I did do here that made it a little easier on me is, once I determined my mark for that top part of the board where I knew I wanted to make that length, I was able to use just a small speed square and mark the 45-degree angle that I wanted so that I could line it up on the blade and make sure that I was actually getting the dimension I wanted. That helped tremendously because then that also allowed me to set the fence at the right length so that once I cut this piece to length, I can take the remainder of the board, flip it over, and just cut the second piece, and we're at the same length. And it worked out really well for me. And what you see me doing here using this gripper push block is a little better than what I was doing earlier. At least it makes it easier to keep it against the fence, but still, honestly, should have been using the miter gauge. Would have been a lot simpler and a lot safer. So just learn from my mistakes, folks, and do this the right way. But despite myself, I was able to get this done. And once all the pieces were cut, then I'm able to go over here and use this jig from Craig in order to start drilling in all of the little holes for the shelf pins. This is the Craig shelf pin jig. Seems to be aptly named because that's kind of what it's for. And it works pretty easy. It's pretty straightforward. You just clamp it to your board and run your drill through it. Makes a whole bunch of holes, and away we go. And then once you get through going down both sides, because you got to have holes on both sides, looks like that. Comes out really good. Now this next part took me way longer than it should have. It took me quite a while to figure out all the proper places to put different clamps in order to get everything clamped together. And you can see the stretchers I put on the front and bottom there on the back in order to hang it on the wall instead of going with a full back. This is going to allow the paint that my wife chooses for the bathroom to kind of show through, and we get some of that as well. But there's the first one glued up, and there's the second one in the clamps. Once it came out of the clamps and they were both ready to go, I threw together this quick little 45-degree jig so that I could put some splines in there because I wanted to make sure to add a little extra strength to those corners just to make sure, because it's going to have a lot of stuff in these. I wanted to do anything I could to help with the strength. So what I did was I just ran this through and put 2 splines in each corner that I came back and filled with walnut as a contrasting wood to the white oak. And then this was actually pretty easy to do. I threw that jig together in just about 5 minutes and just ran with it. I will be making a new one of these jigs later because I've seen some much better designs since I built this one. So I'll build a different one that handles these larger boxes a little better. But all in all, it's pretty simple and it works really well. And once it's all said and done, you just come back and cut your splines to the proper thickness, sand them down if need be, and then you can just put them in those slots that you see. Just went right in there. It worked really well. So unfortunately, I'd lost all the footage I had of making the splines. I had also lost all the footage I had of making these doors. But this was pretty simple. It was just 2 of the panels I glued edge to edge once I determined the patterns that I thought looked best. You'll get a good look at the patterns later on. And all I'm doing here is first to clean up one edge, and then I'm using that stop block I've got there on my sled to cut them down to the final 24-inch length that I want them to be. Once they were cut down to length, then I'm able to come back and cut them to the proper width that I need. And when I went to cut them to the proper width, I actually did each door slightly different. So what you'll see here on this first door, I'm actually going to take a piece off of both edges because the pattern on this door looked best in the center where the glue seam actually was. Fortunately, I was able to get to where the glue seam doesn't show. It just disappears within the woodwork. But I wanted this to come down to the 12-inch overall width I needed to cover. I mentioned it was 10 inches earlier. That's interior plus the three-quarter. So anyway, it comes out to a 12-inch outside width. So that's what I'm cutting these doors down to. And so for this one, since the pattern that we liked the best was in the center of this panel, I'm cutting a little bit off of each edge to bring it down to the final width. And it's just as easy as it sounds. However, the second door, the pattern that I liked best, was actually off to one edge of the panel. So that's why I'm running this panel through first. You see, I had marked to cut off about an inch and a half off of the outside. Cut that off, nice clean edge. Then I set my fence to the overall final width that I want for both doors. Cut off the remainder off of this one so I can get that pattern that you see there in the middle with the wave pattern. My wife mentioned she thought it looked kind of like mountains and she would like that pattern. However, the second one, with the pattern being off to one edge, I just ran it through the one time to get the final dimensions so that I could have the pattern that I wanted. After that, it was off to finishing. Glue up was already done. I ran through a whole bunch of sanding, which I didn't film because, it's sanding. And then went through my finishing process, which again was the Walrus Oil Furniture Maker Master Kit with their oil, butter, and wax. And once it was all said and done, it was time to assemble. Assembly was pretty simple. I did use the hidden hinges, or the Euro hinges, I've heard them called. And this is what we came up with here at the end. And here's our finished result. The Walrus Oil finish really brought out that pattern in the white oak, so I think using these walnut accents in the splines came out. It's a pretty good decision overall. I think they look pretty good. They finished up really nice, and they're a hardwood white oak now instead of plywood. So I think overall, these are going to last in our bathroom for quite a while. And that was one thing we had to keep in mind, was it is a bathroom, it's a high humidity zone. So hence the reason I went with the white oak and the 3-step finish from Walrus Oil. So let me know in the comments below anything you might have done differently, or if you'd like to see me tackle something like this again in the future. Not sure I need any more cabinets in my bathroom right now, but you never know. If you have any questions, feel free to drop those down below. And if you enjoyed this video, which I really hope you did, then check out this one here where I make some small shelves out of purple heart, which is an exotic wood from Southern Hemisphere. So go check me out over there. I'll see you there. And until the next time, y'all be good to each other. Bye.